Every year, my family threw glittering over-the-top birthday parties for my brother, and forgot mine like it was nothing. I told myself it didn't hurt anymore until this year when I stayed silent, bought a lake house with a bonus they never knew I earned, and posted one photo. One. Within minutes, the comments poured in. Anger, confusion, then panic. It was the first time they ever noticed I existed because I finally had something they couldn't control. My name is Orion, and this is the story I never thought I'd say out loud. But before I share it with you, I want to know you're here with me. Just say, listening in the comments, or tell me where you are. I love seeing how far my story can reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if you want more stories like this, raw, honest, and painfully real, make sure to subscribe. It means more than you know. Now let's begin. I drive up the familiar drive on a late autumn afternoon, and the house looks the way it always has, perfectly trimmed hedges, iron gate that clicks closed behind me. A brass Remington plaque catching the weak sun, and for a moment the sight of it feels like an old film rewinding. The foyer smells faintly of lemon polish and something floral my mother always wore. I step into the living room and the room hits me like a set piece, a shrine to my brother. Trophies gleam on shelves, framed certificates crowd the walls, a portrait of Beckett in a suit hangs above the mantel, and a grand piano sits with a tailored sport coat thrown over its bench as if waiting for applause. I have learned to look without expecting to be seen. That has been my practice for as long as I can remember. I used to think the ache was accidental, 1,000 tiny omissions stitched together by busyness. But it is sharper now when I stand among the artifacts of someone else's life and feel invisible in my own home. I remember 3 birthdays like bookmarks in a story I did not get to write. When I was 8, I woke up certain there would be pancakes with candles, the smallness of childhood wrapped in cake and paper crowns. But I find my parents on the phone in the den, animated and laughing. Beckett won his tennis match. There is no cake, no candle. The day slides by like any other. I learned that my excitement can be folded away. On my 16th, my mother gasped one evening at dinner. "Oh my God, I forgot it's your birthday," and her face registers the kind of sudden embarrassment that feels performative. She promises we'll celebrate next weekend, but next weekend is never the same thing. The apology is immediate, the follow-through invisible. On my 21st, the house is full of strangers in cocktail dresses and tuxedos because Beckett's engagement party is that night. I stand in the corner with a plastic cup and pretend that clapping for someone else is what I came to do. The arc from anticipation to disappointment becomes a predictable loop I learn to soothe myself. At dinner once, when I summon whatever courage 16-year-old me had, I say, "Mom, Dad, I feel like my things don't matter as much," and my father Graham barely looks up from his plate and says, "Don't be sensitive. It's fine." My mother redirects the conversation toward Beckett. He's at a critical stage. He needs us. Their words are not listening. They are rules for how the family story must be told. Later that night, searching for Christmas ornaments, I pull down an attic box and find under a bundle of tissue a small creased card with my name and my mother's looping handwriting from when I was 6, "Happy birthday, my little star." For a moment, the handwriting reads like a map to a different past one where attention was possible. The card sits in my palm, like evidence that someone once noticed me enough to write my name. I leave the house that evening with the same hollow warmth I've carried out of this place many times, the knowledge that I will mark my own milestones when no one else will, the private promise that if they choose to forget me, I will choose to remember myself. Packing up felt like shedding expectation. I folded shirts into a duffel, slid a box of textbooks under my arm, and closed the bedroom door on the life that had been arranged more for display than for me. San Francisco felt like a clean-edge ferry building, vendors tossing confetti of citrus peels and herbs, streetcars humming up market espresso steam, making small clouds you could breathe in and forget the rest. I slept on a futon. My first year held 2 part-time jobs and saved every spare dollar because I was learning how to be the thing I had been taught not to expect, someone who could hold his own story. Work at Astra Creative was its own education. The studio was an open-plan engine room of ideas, deadlines, and caffeine, and Marisol Vega, the creative director, had a way of tipping her head and saying, "Orion, You see what the rest of us miss, and in that sentence a small room inside me stopped echoing. I pitched a risky concept in a cramped conference room, once a play that put the user ahead of the brand's glossy ego, and when the client signed the contract, there was a flurry of congratulations I had not known how to accept before. Still, the ache at birthdays reappeared like a predictable weather system. At 25, my family was preoccupied celebrating Beckett's acceptance to a top law firm. My messages got a late reply and a "we'll celebrate when you're in town." At 27, Beckett closed on a house, and the holiday photo album tilted again toward his milestones. I saw their Instagram stories full of ribbon cutting and champagne toasts, and I learned to scroll past without swelling. Each omission taught me to expect less, to plan more for myself. Then one afternoon, home for a visit, an ordinary kitchen visit. I pass by my mother's office and glance up at the family calendar pinned over the desk. My breath stalls, dates circled in red for Beckett ceremonies, rehearsals, dinners, plenty of color and attention. My own birthdays are there too, but recent years show them crossed out and annotated in a neat small hand prioritized Beckett move to next weekend. The handwriting is my mother's. It is the record of choices, not mistakes. The worst part is not the crossing out itself, but the clarity it brings. This is not forgetfulness, it is deliberate editorializing of our lives. Heat rises in my chest, a mix of anger and grief that rearranges my future into something like resolve. If they are editing me out, I think then I will write myself back in. I return to San Francisco with a different kind of plan. I climb the career ladder at Astra with deliberate steps, taking extra briefs, staying late studying the metrics that become leverage. I open a savings account and feed it the spare change of my dignity until a bonus turns into something real. I tell myself the promise softly at night one day. I will own something that belongs to me. If they choose to forget, I will choose to remember. The campaign had been a long, stubborn climb, the kind that eats weekends and rewrites your life into meeting notes and late-night brainstorms, and when the client called to say sales were up and new customers were converting faster than anyone had forecasted, the applause in the conference room sounded like permission. Marisol walked me to the front like she was introducing a discovery. She spoke my name, traced the parts of the idea that had cut through, and the CEO, who rarely took the podium, smiled and said something that made my hands go cold. There would be a special performance bonus for the team lead. When the number was announced, the room blurred for a beat $75,000. It felt absurd and glorious at the same time, a sum that could change small life equations, that could buy a kind of proof I had never been given at home. I sat at my desk for a long while after the meeting, the paper confirmation folded in my pocket, thinking about who I would tell. There was a simple hunger in me for recognition. An impulse to text a photo of the letter and watch my parents' faces soften to hear Mom say, "We're so proud," and to feel that years of omission could be softened by a single shared triumph. But another voice, older and steadier, cataloged the patterns: past birthdays, overlooked achievements, shrugged off public family stories, always edited to make Beckett the hero. I called Rowan and listened to her answer, the warm clarity in her voice that always made decisions feel less lonely. "Celebrate," she said. "Show them. If they mean it, they'll be happy." That should have been comforting, but it only sharpened the question of whether their happiness was ever really for me or always for the story they wanted to tell. I decided to keep the bonus to myself for a while. The choice felt like an experiment, a quiet test. If I made something that belonged to me and said nothing, would the family notice that I existed when I had nothing they could control? I opened a new high-yield savings account and started feeding it like a ritual. I read listings late into the night, drawn to places that felt like permission, small weathered cottages with decks and docks, places that looked plain on the outside but honest inside. Lake Chelan kept reappearing in searches, a compact cottage with a wraparound deck, a stone fireplace, a private dock that leaned into the water like an invitation. I emailed Lila Moreno and scheduled a virtual tour for the next day. The virtual walkthrough showed light slicing across floorboards, a kitchen that needed love, a small den with built-in shelves that begged to be filled. On my 31st birthday, I took the morning slow coffee, a walk, the small ritual of giving myself the day, and then in a quiet moment that felt both reckless and inevitable, I signed the electronic offer and pushed the deposit through. My hands trembled in the elevator afterwards, equal parts fear and a buoyant sort of pride. It was the first time I had bought something that existed because I had earned it, not because it was allocated to me in a family narrative. That night, I stood on my apartment balcony in San Francisco and looked across the glittering water toward the Bay Bridge. The family calendar image kept looping in my head, those red circles and the neat handwriting that had moved my dates around. I had made a choice that mirrored a choice I had discovered in that calendar. If they were deciding what to emphasize, I would decide what to own. I told myself that when I posted a few photos from the lake in a week or two, whatever happened next would simply show me the truth. The drive to Lake Chelan felt like cutting through a thin skin of my old life. The highway opened and the world smelled of cedar and cold water. I arrived mid-afternoon to a house that fit my idea of patience peeling paint, that made the porch look lived in, rather than neglected a boulder-lined path down to a private dock light falling across the deck in a way that seemed to say stay. I unlocked the front door with the keys Lila handed me, and the quiet inside was the kind of permission I had been starved for. I unpacked a few boxes, set a mug on the counter, and without much thought I took a handful of photos, a close-up of the worn banister, the lake mirrored like glass sunlight blooming on the deck chairs. I posted one of them with a small caption, "A weekend reset." I meant it as a private punctuation, a note to myself. The first replies were the ones I expected: Rowan's heart-eyed emoji and a quick message. "Where is this? Did you buy a place?" A couple of colleagues asked if I was moving. Those messages made me smile until my phone buzzed harder, a text from my mother that read, "Where are you? Whose house is that? Call me now." It arrived like an alarm. Another followed almost immediately, sharper in tone. "Orion, this is not a joke." My stomach dropped. I left the phone on the kitchen counter and walked to the dock. The lake was wind-stippled, a slow ripple, and for a few minutes I let the sound calm me. Then my phone lit with more messages. My father wrote, "Explain this immediately. This behavior is concerning." Beckett left a comment under the photo, terse and familiar. "What are you doing? Are you renting?" Call. Then an old voicemail appeared, my mother's voice tight with an emotion that was not only worry. "Not now. Beckett needs space for his partner meeting next week. Don't distract everyone." The words landed differently than any previous admonition. It was the first time I heard my own existence framed as a distraction from their plans. For a moment I felt a perverse clarity. My purchase, which I thought would be a quiet proof for myself, had already become an irritant to them. I thought about answering, about soothing the panic, about explaining the ledger of my life. But the newness of this home made me want to keep a small pocket of silence. I walked back inside and left the phone face down. I wanted to see how they would weave this absence into their story. The family group chat bloomed like an infection, cousins forwarding the picture, an aunt asking if I was having money trouble, an uncle calling me reckless in a message meant for everyone. Rumors began to stitch themselves in seconds. I made coffee and stood at the window watching the light change over the water and felt a strange steadiness settle in my chest. They had been practicing a version of control for years. Now I held a fact they couldn't edit without acknowledging me. The quiet in the house that night was a kind of armistice, but I knew storms when I smelled them. I set the phone on the table and looked out over the lake, thinking of the calendar on my mother's wall of tiny crosses and priorities she had penciled in for years. For the first time, I felt the equation shift. I had something that was mine and they had to react to it. The message came in the family group chat like a summons. Thursday, 7 p.m. Family dinner. Orion must be there. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command wrapped in politeness, the kind that didn't bother pretending I had a choice. I stared at it longer than I meant to, feeling that old childhood instinct to comply tug at me before I pushed it down. They didn't want to understand. They wanted to regain control of the narrative, and I wasn't going to hand it back just because they raised their voices. All afternoon, I replayed birthdays they'd erased without hesitation, the years I waited for cake, for acknowledgement, for anything at all, and told myself I wasn't walking into that house to shrink again. I was going because I needed to see them clearly, without the soft focus of wishful thinking. I arrived at Beverly Crest exactly at 7. Instead of stepping inside like I used to, I rang the doorbell. The simple act felt like reclaiming something small but significant. My mother opened the door with a smile that strained at the edges, her eyes flickering over me as if trying to gauge what version of me she would have to manage tonight. The living room hadn't changed. Beckett's trophies gleamed from every angle, his awards arranged like museum exhibits curated for maximum pride. I felt the distance between what this house celebrated and what it ignored. Before dinner even began, I heard Beckett's voice from the dining room. "We just have to make him understand." The words landed like confirmation they had met, discussed me, decided on an approach. I stepped inside as the conversation abruptly died. My father wasted no time. "Why did you buy a house without telling us? Are you in debt?" The disbelief in his tone wasn't about my well-being. It was about my audacity. I answered simply, "No." My mother leaned forward, eyes wide, almost accusatory. "Then where did the money come from, Orion? You can't hide things like this from your family." The implication that secrecy equaled instability hung in the air. Then she added in a lowered voice, meant to sound concerned, "Are you overwhelmed at work? Acting impulsively can be a sign of burnout." The assumption that I must be unraveling to make a major purchase hit harder than their anger. They truly believed my success was unlikely unless it came with a breakdown. I told them the truth. I got a bonus. $75,000. The room stilled. My father frowned as if I'd spoken in another language. "How?" he asked. "You don't have a senior role." I explained the skincare campaign, the metrics, the recognition, the announcement from the CEO. Beckett let out a soft, dismissive laugh. "It's just advertising. Not exactly headline material." His tone told me everything. No matter what I achieved, it would always be framed as less. The conversation shifted when I brought up the birthdays. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said I remembered them, everyone they'd chosen to gloss over. My mother's expression pinched before she slipped almost absently. "I thought you didn't like a fuss." And Beckett always had more going on, so She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. She admitted it without understanding what she had confessed. They prioritized him. Deliberately. Repeatedly. I stood slowly, my chair scraping the hardwood floor. I stayed quiet because saying anything never changed anything. But I'm not a child anymore. I don't need permission to build a life. My father set his jaw. "Sell the house. You're not equipped to manage property. It's the sensible thing to do." It wasn't advice, it was an order. I felt the moment settle, heavy and irreversible. "I'm not selling," I said. The room went silent, the kind of silence that shifts the ground under your feet. I realized then that the conversation wasn't about real estate. It never had been. This was the first time I had chosen myself in a way they couldn't ignore. No one spoke again. I let the quiet gather around us, then turned toward the door, feeling the air in the house grow thicker behind me, as if the walls themselves objected to my refusal. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair, the fabric cool in my hands, and headed for the door without waiting for anyone to protest. My mother hurried after me, her voice tight with fear rather than understanding, while my father stood halfway out of his chair, rigid and silent. I stopped in the foyer long enough to say, "I'm not going to apologize for building a life that's mine," and something in the room tightened like a pulled thread. Outside, beneath the porch lights, Beckett stepped directly into my path. "What are you trying to prove?" he asked, not angry, confused, as if my choices were written in a language he'd never had to learn. I looked him in the eye. "I'm not proving anything to you. I'm proving to myself that I deserve more than being the background character in my own family." He didn't argue. For the first time in years, he didn't have a comeback ready. He stepped aside quietly, and that silence said more than anything he could have thrown at me. Driving away from Beverly Crest felt like peeling away an old skin. Relief and sadness braided together as the neighborhood gave way to open road. I replayed my father's words, his certainty that I wasn't capable, his insistence that my decision was reckless, and felt the familiar sting, but beneath it a growing steadiness. My phone buzzed. Rowan's name lit the screen. I saw the comments. "Are you okay?" she asked when I answered. I told her everything. The dinner, the accusations, the demand to sell. She exhaled sharply. "They're scared," she said. "You're independent now. People who relied on your silence don't know what to do when you stop giving it." Her words settled into me with the weight of truth. Not long after, an email notification appeared. My mortgage approval had cleared. The house was officially mine, no turning back. The timing felt almost poetic, as if the universe had waited for me to stand my ground before giving me the final signature. Then came a voicemail from my mother. 2 lines layered with contradictions. "I'm only worried about you," followed by, "Please don't do this while Beckett has such an important week coming up." Even her concern was filtered through the lens of his priorities. A text from my father arrived next. "If you don't attend the family meeting next week, don't blame me for the consequences." It was the kind of message designed to snap me back into place, to remind me of the hierarchy I was expected to obey. Instead, it clarified something I hadn't fully admitted before: their love had rules, and those rules had always been built around someone else. I didn't drive home to San Francisco. I turned north toward Lake Chelan. The road wound through dark pines and long stretches of quiet highway, the night air brushing against the windows like a reassurance. The farther I got from Beverly Crest, the easier it became to breathe. I arrived well past midnight headlights sweeping across the gravel driveway of my new home. A figure moved in the yard next door: Margaret, an older woman I'd met once during the tour, watering her garden even at this hour. She waved me over, invited me in for a mug of hot tea. We sat at her small kitchen table while the kettle steamed the air between us. She asked nothing, prying, only smiled at the exhaustion on my face. "Homes by the lake have a way of finding the right people," she said gently. "Sometimes we think we choose them, but really they choose us." The words felt simple, but they landed deep, like someone had nudged a truth I wasn't ready to say out loud: that this place might be the first thing in my life that reflected me, rather than my family's expectations. When I stepped onto my deck afterward, the lake spread out in quiet darkness, a vast, steady presence that didn't ask me to earn it. For the first time in years, I felt the pieces of myself settle into something whole. I wasn't afraid of losing my family anymore. The only thing that felt unbearable now was the thought of losing myself by returning to the version of me they preferred. 3 days passed in complete silence, the kind that doesn't feel accidental. I half expected another demand from my father or a carefully worded message from my mother, but instead it was Beckett who finally reached out. His text was short, almost startlingly simple. "Please come home. Just you. We need to talk." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred, weighing the familiar pull toward resolution against the exhaustion of always being the one to bend first. But I also knew I couldn't let the last conversation stand as the final version of us. I needed closure, even if it hurt. So I agreed. Driving back into Beverly Crest felt like approaching a memory I no longer lived inside. The house looked the same, but something in me had shifted enough that it didn't feel like mine anymore. Inside, the air was colder than usual, unnaturally quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioning. The walls were still crowded with images of Beckett graduations, awards, framed articles, but for the first time they struck me not as achievements, but as placeholders for the years of my life that had been swallowed whole. The room felt like a museum curated to leave me out. My father started the moment I sat down. "I don't understand why you had to make this into such a spectacle. Big decisions should be discussed with the family." His tone suggested authority, not curiosity. I stayed calm. It was my decision, and I'm not a child. My mother's face crumpled, tears spilling before she spoke. "You don't understand, Orion. This family has sacrificed so much to help Beckett get where he is. Everything has to move in order, or it all falls apart." Her voice held an edge that told me this wasn't just worry, it was ideology. I realized then that my silence over the years hadn't been ignored. It had been useful. My absence kept their structure intact. My presence, especially now, disrupted it. Beckett leaned forward, looking almost guilty. "Did you ever consider that they think you're the strong one, that you don't need anything?" He said it softly, like it was meant to comfort. But it hit me with a different kind of ache. It wasn't strength. They saw it was convenience. They built a role for me that served the rest of them, then worked backward until it felt like truth. I took a breath and told them about the calendar. The crossed-out birthdays, the notes to prioritize Beckett. The years of shifting me to the margins, not because they forgot, but because it made their lives easier. For the first time, they went silent in a way that wasn't dismissive, but exposed. My mother whispered I was afraid too much would happen at once. Beckett needed stability. And I didn't. I asked. My father exhaled long and heavy. Your milestones. They never seemed as important, not enough to rally the whole family. The sentence carved through 30 years of trying to be seen. It was the kind of honesty that doesn't heal, it confirms your deepest fear. I told them everything then. The loneliness, the self-soothing, the feeling of being an accessory in my own house, the exhaustion of watching them parade Beckett's achievements while never once asking what I dreamed for myself. No one interrupted me. They couldn't. The truth was too loud. Then something unexpected happened. Beckett looked at me and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't see it. I was too busy being who they needed me to be." His voice didn't wobble, but something in it had softened. For the first time, he wasn't performing. The moment didn't last long. My father straightened. "If you want us to trust your judgment, sell the house. Prove your priorities are still with this family." My mother's eyes pleaded with me, but it wasn't love, it was fear of losing control of the story they'd built. I stood the decision already solid in my chest. I'm not selling anything. I'm choosing myself. My mother cried harder. My father's jaw clenched. Beckett looked between us, unsure of what came next. I didn't wait to find out. I walked to the door with a steadiness I didn't know I possessed. I didn't look back. On the driveway, under the soft glow of the porch lights, I understood something that had taken me decades to name. Some relationships don't change until one person refuses to play the part they were assigned. And tonight, I had finally stepped out of mine. I spent the next week at Lake Chelan, letting the silence settle into me. I repaired the loose screen door, rearranged the living room, bought a desk for the corner that caught the morning sun. The house felt sturdier every day, as if it approved of my staying. Peace wasn't perfect, it had an echo of grief in it, but it felt honest in a way my childhood home never had. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. Not anymore. On the 7th morning, Beckett arrived without warning. His car crunched over the gravel, and he walked up the porch steps looking more like a brother and less like a legend. He didn't waste time. "I need to apologize," he said. "Not for Mom and Dad. For me." He told me he'd been under pressure for years, always performing, always being the one they invested in, but that none of it excused how he'd ignored me. "You deserve better from me," he said. I let myself soften. "I don't need perfection," I told him. "I just need to be seen." "I see you now," he said, and for once, I believed him. Something in our relationship clicked into place, not fixed, but reset like a door finally swinging on its proper hinge. A few days later, a letter arrived from my mother. Her handwriting was shaky but careful. She apologized for the years she'd built the family around Beckett's trajectory and had assumed my quiet meant comfort instead of resignation. The letter had contradictions, excuses tangled with guilt, but it was real. She wrote, "If you'll let me, I want to start fresh." My father didn't send an apology, but he sent something I never expected, an email about property values in Lake Chelan. "It's a solid investment. Maintain it well." It wasn't affection, but it was acknowledgement. For him, that was seismic. I agreed to meet them at a cafe in Seattle, neutral ground where the walls didn't hold any of our history. We sat across from each other, 3 people relearning how to speak. I explained the boundaries I needed, the ones I should have set years ago. I told them I wouldn't contort myself to fit their expectations anymore. My father nodded slowly, eyes fixed on his coffee. "I'm not good at this," he said, "but if you want me to try, I will." For him, it was an olive branch he had never offered anyone. Change came slowly, but it came. My mother started calling, not to check up on me, but to ask about my work. She sent articles she thought I'd find interesting and waited to hear my thoughts. My father asked for pictures of the renovations. Beckett and I talked every couple of weeks, not out of obligation, but out of something closer to choice. The shifts were small, but they were steady enough to feel real. One evening, as the sun melted into the lake and turned the water gold, I stood on my deck and watched the ripples flare outward. The house smelled of cedar and fresh paint, and for the first time in my life I felt rooted, not because someone expected me to be, but because I had chosen it. I thought about all the years I'd spent waiting to be celebrated, waiting for someone else to mark my life as meaningful. But the truth had unfolded itself gently over these weeks. My worth never depended on whether my family remembered my birthday. It lived in the quiet courage of choosing myself, even when no one else did. I whispered into the open air, almost to the lake itself. What I needed wasn't a perfect family. What I needed was the right to exist fully in my own story. The cottage behind me wasn't just a home. It was proof. Proof that I could build something solid out of the parts of myself they'd overlooked. If they learned to see me wonderful. If they didn't, my life would still be whole. I had finally found the place I belonged because I chose it, and because it chose me back. As I stood there on the deck watching the sun slip beneath the horizon, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The night air had a softness to it, and the lake seemed to mirror my thoughts. Calm, unhurried, as though it had been waiting for me to catch up. I thought about everything that had led me here, the years of silence, of waiting for recognition that never came, the endless striving to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. And now, for the first time in my life, I was here in a place I had built on my own terms. It wasn't the absence of my family that made me feel complete. It was the presence of myself. I had spent so many years trying to be someone else's version of successful, trying to earn the approval of people who couldn't even see me for who I was. I had forgotten what it felt like to just exist without performing for others, to be allowed the space to breathe without conditions attached. Now, standing here in this house, I realized that my worth had never been tied to the memories they created without me, the birthdays they forgot, or the milestones they overlooked. It was always mine to define. The house itself had become a symbol, a tangible reminder that I had chosen a life for myself, not dictated by the expectations of others. I built this every decision, every choice, and that realization settled deep within me, quiet but strong. I had been so afraid for so long. Afraid to disappoint my family, afraid that if I wasn't constantly fighting for attention, I would be forgotten, ignored, or worse, abandoned. But I wasn't abandoned. I had abandoned the idea that my worth depended on their acknowledgement. And when I let that go, something inside me shifted. I found a peace I didn't know I was missing. I thought back to the moment I decided to buy this place. It felt reckless at the time, driven by something deep within me that was more than just the desire to escape. It was a need to claim something for myself, to finally make a decision that was about me and not anyone else. I made that choice knowing that the people I had hoped would cheer me on might never understand it. But what I didn't realize then was how it would change me, how it would reshape my understanding of who I am and who I am willing to be. I felt a surge of gratitude for this place, for this life I had slowly but surely built out of the wreckage of old expectations. And I realized with startling clarity that this is the life I deserve. Not because I've been perfect, but because I've fought, I've fallen, and I've gotten back up again. And now I get to choose. This is my story, and I'll tell it on my own terms. I don't need anyone to validate me, not anymore. Not when I have the power to create my own future, to build my own happiness. If you're reading this and you feel lost, unseen, or like you don't belong in the version of your life that others have written for you, I want you to know it's okay. You are allowed to carve your own path. You are allowed to make choices for yourself, even if they disappoint others. The people who matter will see you. The people who are meant to walk alongside you will stay, and those who don't, well, maybe they were never meant to. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's fair. But I can tell you from the other side that the freedom you feel when you stop living for someone else's version of you is worth every ounce of struggle. The weight I carried for years, the expectations, the disappointment, the desire to prove myself vanished when I realized I didn't need their approval to be proud of who I am. If you're stuck in a cycle of waiting for someone else to notice your worth, I challenge you to stop waiting. Start making choices for yourself. Start living for you. I promise you it will feel scarier than anything you've done before. But when you get to the other side of that fear, you'll realize that the power was always in your hands. And to anyone out there who feels invisible, unheard, or like they're always one step behind, remember this. You matter. Your voice matters. Your dreams matter. You have the right to build a life that reflects who you are, not who others think you should be. This house, this life, it's mine. I built it. and I am enough.